this video is sponsored by Opera GX. Animal Crossing-esque aesthetics in horror games are something that I don't think I could ever grow tired of. It's a perfect marriage between the more macabre genre that I love with the adorable nostalgic visuals of a series that has been present in my life since childhood. Seeing how different developers approach this specific mix of opposing atmospheres has resulted in surprisingly varied experiences. And a couple weeks ago, I was given a key for a title that completely shattered my expectations as to just how unique and ambitious they can be. It pulled me into a world that I thought I understood, but the dark mystery beneath the surface of DISCOPUP revealed something I could have never imagined. I like to explore combinations of visual themes not only in games but in my daily browsing too, which brings me on to today's sponsor, Opera GX. I've been using the browser for years at this point, and it provides a lot of options when it comes to all the mods you can download. From static and animated wallpapers that can offer both light and dark versions, to background music and sound effects for tab interactions and typing. Customizing the experience has never been easier. You can even enable and disable things like sidebar and taskbar icons, custom fonts, and experiment with shaders for really cool screen effects. My favourite features include the comforting darkness of the Force Dark mode option and the incredibly useful video pop-out function, as well as the ad blocker and built-in VPN that helps protect my privacy against the unwanted presences of the online world. Switching to Opera GX is super easy thanks to the quick import tool, and you can move over your bookmarks, browsing history, and cookies from your old browser. Plus, it even supports Google Chrome extensions too. Be sure to use my link below to download Opera GX today and give it a try. A big thank you to Opera GX for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. A bus pulled into view as I took control of a seal waiting at the nearby bus stop on their way to a club called DiscoPup. Hopping on and speaking to the driver, it became clear we needed to have a pass to be able to board the journey to Disco Street, and it also indicated that certain interactions add time to the clock at the top right corner. With no choice but to return to the street, I decided to explore the rest of the area for a bit, recklessly digging through dumpsters and talking to an owl, failing to pay attention to all the minutes I was accumulating. Suddenly, the clock struck 12:43, and I realised my mistake when the bus left without me. Once again, I found myself at the bus stop, and as someone who doesn't read descriptions half the time and plays things purely based on vibes, I finally registered that this was a time loop game. To be honest, it's not normally a structure I enjoy aside from one or two exceptions, but I had little to lose as I now understood how to save the minutes I had previously thrown away, and knew one more attempt would get me on board the adorably proportioned public transit. This time around, I spoke to the one character I had foolishly ignored before, and was granted the knowledge of which dumpster would yield some results, acquiring a lovely collection of random cards which luckily included a bus pass. I dashed over to the driver and brandished my key to entry, rewarding me with free passage to Disco Street and what is probably the most vibey intro I've ever seen. I jumped off the bus just across the road from the famed DiscoPup, and after just a few steps, I caught a glimpse of a queue that had already formed outside the club's doors. Unfortunately, the line wasn't budging, and after talking to the rather curt bouncer, I learned that anyone who was not a dog would not be allowed inside the venue. Instinctually, I started rummaging through the nearby dumpster and found a dog mask, but alas, the bouncer saw right through my disguise. Still, the description in the inventory menu said it could work with the right accessories, and thus began my hunt for a suitable canine fit. I ran around speaking to various animals and honking cars before going to see what the neighbouring street would hold. But little did I know, this was where the cracks would begin to show. I noticed it was possible to ring the doorbells of the houses located in this area, and I of course had to test each one to see if it could help me in my costume quest. Nothing happened at the first building, and the second wasn't particularly fruitful, so I repeatedly rang the doorbell of the final house with low expectations. The music stopped and the door creaked open, revealing a rabbit standing and staring in silence. I could just about make out its strange twitching facial features before the door slammed shut. It wasn't exactly a terrifying encounter, but up until this point I had completely forgotten this game had horror elements at all. And so even the slightest out-of-place eeriness was enough to start chipping away at this seemingly innocent facade. though soon that interaction felt like an almost distant memory as I continued chatting with the quirky inhabitants, which included a small group who seemed to be fixated on the idea of microwaving spoons, and I also came across a little mouse whose dialogue text was equally minuscule. Immediately afterwards, I noticed a puppy with a toy gun standing in the middle of the road, and thought nothing of it as I agreed to play cowboys with him. Probably should have seen that one coming actually, yeah. My torment would not end there, however, because speaking to an angel seal standing outside the pearly gates would reveal that, just like DISCOPUP, only dogs were allowed in. So I was instead directed to a building on the right, but unfortunately I was then informed that there was no room inside, and I'd have to go to the backyard, which had nothing but a lone gravestone in the corner. Miraculously though, this teleported me back to the land of the living, and I immediately confronted my murderer, hoping for an apology. Of course, the little brat found it funny, and from there on, I kept an eye open for a way to get revenge. I navigated through the adjacent maze, discovering a part I could break through which would act as a shortcut from here on out, and a short distance past that, I discovered a revolver. With total confidence and my new weapon equipped, I once again faced the puppy and… ah, shit. I thought it best to postpone my revenge for now, and acquainted myself with a magician who can quite unfairly read my mind and beat me in every game of rock, paper, scissors. The humiliation wouldn't stop there, and I was reminded that I had somehow already forgotten that this is a time loop game. After being chucked back to the main menu and loading my save, I was thankfully placed back at my first arrival to Disco Street, and so I went straight to searching the corners I had left untouched and interacted with characters I had missed on my last loop. I found a bunch of different headwear options, but without new clothing, it was never enough to get me past the bouncer. So far though, this loop had been pretty chill, and there's a particular field I went to that featured a lone cow gazing at the starry night sky while peaceful music played. I remember thinking about how much I loved this game already, and even took a moment to just hang out for a bit. It was in this field that I found a special key, which brought to mind a comically large padlock that blocked access to an area behind DISCOPUP, so when I was ready, I ran back and entered the alleyway. There was no shortage of odd individuals, which kept in line with pretty much all the personalities I had spoken to thus far, and once I spotted a stairway leading to the subway, I of course had to see what I would find. I decided to try going as far as I could in this loop, just to see what other areas I could access, so I sprinted through the subway and accessed one of the elevators. It brought me to the room of a shady mask dealer who told me that they'd make me a mask that would get me into DISCOPUP in exchange for the ring of a lost king, and with that, I went on my way to search for their request, running across the other side of the platform until I saw an open door that was supposed to signify a public toilet. I could already see from the doorway that it was just another platform for another track, but a realistic dog model stood guard at the edge like something that did not belong in this world. I hesitated before talking to it, and was unnerved as it spoke back.
Are you looking for the ring? It's right here.
A pair of green curtains slowly appeared, leaving a gap between them that Cerberus gave me the option to enter. I needed that ring if I was ever going to get through the doors of DISCOPUP, and so I braved the darkness. Now, before I continue, I'm going to take a moment to encourage anyone who wants to go through the experience of DISCOPUP for themselves to stop the video, play the game, and hopefully come back to watch the rest. Still, I'm not going to be covering every detail and interaction in the game, just so there is a fair amount left to discover for yourselves. But I will eventually be getting into the ending and providing my own interpretation of the events and setting of the game, so take this as a heavy spoiler warning from here on out. The veil lifted and I began to move forward after a moment, but it felt as though my character moved before I even touched my keyboard. As they disappeared from my view, I helplessly ran towards the door in a panic in an attempt to catch up, finally seeing that my controls had changed to first person. I was a little anxious without the presence of the familiar seal I had been anchored to up until now, continuing my way through this mirrored subway realm. Something was very different though. The brick walls were revealed to be backdrops, and light sources originated from spotlights like the backstage of a theatre production. Things were a whole lot messier in this version of the subway, and as I peeked through a crack between the fake walls, I could catch a glimpse of something hiding behind a slightly open door. There was no way to get any closer, so I left to discover a mannequin standing in a tunnel with its head censored and its hand held outwards, offering me what could only be the ring I was looking for. I took it and turned around in relief to find my dear seal Yuri waiting behind me for the prize. After handing it over, I headed back towards the curtains and found myself once again in the comforts of my previous dimension, which brought me to the end of yet another loop. Immediately, I checked my inventory to lament the loss of progress, but celebrated the second I saw the alleyway key and precious ring seated in their slots. I decided to chat with some more residents, and an old granny begged me to help her find her husband's ring. Out of some pity, but mostly curiosity, I gave her the one I had found, only to discover that she had scammed me and her plan was to sell it for a load of money. With no game mechanic that allowed me to rugby tackle her to the ground, I grumpily dragged myself to the nearby bar to drown my sorrows. Surprisingly, my mood did improve. The DJ gave me the option to play an absolute banger, and not only that, but I got a brand new helmet and stole a shield on the wall, which gave me an idea. I faced my nemesis once again, now presented with a parry button. I waited patiently for my sign to strike my keyboard, but because of a rather ill-timed text notification from my mum, I looked away from my screen and… oh man. I shamelessly went back for my final showdown, and this time I didn't miss. The cowboy hat was mine, but I still lacked any new clothing to complete my outfit. With that, I revisited the subway, clearing a bunch of rubble at one end of the train tracks and stumbling upon a hidden cult lurking in the shadows. They blabbered about the silver lords of the stars and the language of the cosmos, but the good thing was they gifted me a tunic. The bad news was I ran out of time again. I would not repeat the mistake of being conned by that scheming granny, and instead went back to the shady mask dealer to see if that trade would be any more fruitful. The screen went black, and the sounds of what might have been animals being slaughtered rang through my headphones. The dealer returned and gave me a rather disturbing mask, and its description didn't exactly put my mind at ease either, saying that it was too realistic. But don't worry, it's not made out of dog, it's made out of everything else. After grabbing my cult outfit and the cowboy hat, I approached DISCOPUP's bouncer. My disguise was successful, and after all my hard work, I was at last granted access to the club. I spoke to every other phony in there, and none of them seemed all too pleased by my horrifying mask, implying that I had gone way too far in putting together my dog cosplay. There was one last attendee I had yet to talk to who was standing by the VIP room, and by interacting with them, I learned that this goat seemed to have been acquainted with Yuri. From their conversation, it sounded like they had almost escaped this place, but Yuri was possibly betrayed by them in some way, and their plan failed. On the bright side, I received a saxophone which I could use to put Cerberus to sleep, though with no musical notes or any other way out, I could only interact with the circular prompt in the middle of the dance floor. Obviously, there was more to do, and I racked my brain for other leads that could guide me to the notes for the dog's lullaby. I remembered the numerous posters in the subway that portrayed missing cows, who were noted to have last been seen at the open field at 1:35 AM. And with that specific time and place in mind, I wasted the necessary amount of minutes to reach my goal. Amusingly, the cow that was once standing in the center of the area had been replaced by an alien and a spaceship. Sadly, I couldn't understand anything they said and was given a tinfoil hat once the conversation ended. But I thought back to that cult and the tunic that supposedly gave me knowledge of the language of the cosmos, so I figured I would grab that just in case it helped. I returned to the field once more. However, something changed. The field was completely empty, and the sky was now devoid of stars. I pushed through the unsettling silence and looked over in the darkness beyond the fence, realizing there were giant figures watching me. Not wanting to stay for long, I left the area. I had some remaining freedom before the loop ended and tested out my tinfoil hat against the mind-reading magician. My lack of strategy meant I still lost 2 games of rock, paper, scissors and wasted too much time, but I won on my 3rd attempt and was rewarded with a fancy suit. The next loop began, so I collected my robes and grabbed that paper mask at the beginning since that was enough for the other non-dogs within DISCOPUP. I visited the spaceship once again, and thanks to the power of the tunic, I could understand what they were saying, resulting in the captain explaining that they were in search of the end of the world and that their technology points towards DISCOPUP. They were too afraid to enter, however, sensing that something was wrong, and share with Yuri the sequence of notes required to put the dog to sleep. I ran back down to the subway and I'm sorry, is that a runaway gate? Anyway, I continued towards Cerberus, noticing that the tunnel leading to them now had a view of theatre equipment, as though the realm beyond the curtain was seeping through. As I stood beside the gateway to the other place, I pulled out the saxophone and played my tune. Cerberus was silenced. I entered this other dimension, now freely moving through and following Yuri up some stairs that took me to the alleyway in its backstage form, which in turn led me to this version of DISCOPUP. It seemed to be in disarray, perhaps not yet having been assembled, and I grabbed the VIP key from the nearby wall. Yuri instructed me to quickly give her the key before Cerberus caught up with us and gave me a jump scare. Now, with my new key in hand, I started my next loop so I'd have enough time to get a suitable outfit for entry, and thanks to a stylish enough suit and hat, I could get away with just the paper mask. As a bonus, the others were no longer disturbed by my costume, and so I waltzed into the VIP room. I was separated from Yuri and was stopped from following any further at another pair of doors. I watched as she ran to the exit of the cinema screen and opened the door, the space beyond only showing a blurry vision of real-life footage. In response, a person in a dog mask got up from their seat to address Yuri, saying that things aren't any better out there. They understand why she'd want to escape, explaining that they once wished to flee and forget, but they could never run fast enough and so had to make a choice. The mysterious figure finishes by saying, "You can stare into the light, let it cast shadows of your mind, but if you want the real thing, you can only act where you belong. Let the lights illuminate your steps. Remove your mask and face the consequences." With that, I was transported back to the club's main room, and heeding my instructions, I stood upon the light of the dance floor and removed my mask. A super wholesome dance scene plays, and everybody in the club abandons their masks too, dancing freely into the night. There was one more thing left to do, and back in my first-person view, I passed through the VIP doors and looked upon the humans in the front row wearing dog masks, the same figures I saw in the dark abyss of the field's night sky. They spoke about their roles in the making of the film, from costumes to props to music, and I was even asked what I thought about how everything went. I gazed upon the only empty chair in the front row labelled with the word director and sat down, bringing an end to the movie and rolling the credits, which to no one's surprise featured a banger. I loved DISCOPUP, and while I didn't initially plan to make a video on it, I checked out the Steam page once the credits were over and saw a criminally low number of reviews on the game. I of course had to try and bring some more attention to what ended up being one of my favourite indies of the year. And I also quite liked the idea of going through even more loops to get all the endings and uncover as many secrets as I could. This video has been a retelling of my experience thus far to bring everybody up to speed regardless of if they played the game or not. So I'm very excited to now start discussing my own analysis and interpretation of the themes and events, as well as what I learned from speaking to one of the developers. I spent several hours running through loops of DISCOPUP, and almost every single time there was something new I would come across. Sometimes when I would re-enter an area, new characters would appear or I'd notice a cable running across the floor. I even began questioning what was there previously and what wasn't, and given the RNG spawns of certain things, it had me running back and forth playing spot the difference in each zone. During my playthrough, I chanced upon the normally broken elevator suddenly working, pulling me down into the alternate subway realm without having to go through the usual route. As I suspected, there was indeed something different, and I could see that the once unreachable door hiding a character was now accessible. I made my way into this void, weighed down by the feeling I was not supposed to be here, and presumably neither was the pink cat in front of me. Arista says that they need to tell me something, but before they do, the game shuts itself down. There are 2 more backstage characters like this according to the achievement image, and I managed to find another in the alleyway. Now, the statue had an option to speak instead of just reading the plaque, and despite it being Yuri conversing with them, the statue directly refers to you, the player and director. You're a king whom emperors serve, and yet you complain, though you know nothing of the craft. You barely know what's best for you. Why would you know anything else? But they know what's best for them. They turn to scheming, some to great pleasure. For emperors, there's nothing but conquest, and your kingdom is no exception. It wasn't even yours in the first place. Thus, who serves whom? As with any of the analysis in this video, this is just my interpretation, so keep that in mind. But I think it makes sense for the king to be describing the director, and this isn't the first time this is mentioned. When Yuri is on the hunt for the ring of a lost king, Cerberus allows entry to the other realm, taking us behind the stage curtain's veil where the ring is located. This place and the VIP area are the only 2 locations where Yuri is detached from our influence, though you could say she needs our intervention in passing her the ring and the VIP key which she demands from us. Even when Yuri already has the ring and re-enters, saying that they want to know about the lost king, Cerberus replies that they're not lost, and the only place you can find them is in this backstage dimension. Going back to what the statue said, it also seems to imply that the emperors who serve the king and wish to conquer their kingdom are the characters or actors on the stage of DISCOPUP. We come across characters who trick us and those around them, doing what is going to benefit them in a setting that does seem dangerous, unfair, and corrupt. This is your movie to an extent. I mean, it shows your username in the intro credits to say this is a film by you. And besides, the story doesn't move forward without the director and player, but the way everything goes is as though you only have the control over one actor, Yuri. The others don't appear too concerned about following the plot at all, they're just living their lives, and we instead have to learn how to navigate towards the credits through trial and error and learning what parts of the script are already predetermined and what outcomes they have. The other VIPs seem to have more power than we do, however, building the props, writing the story, while we just simply adapt it while facing these set limitations. We too unknowingly fill a role. The statue also mentions that this kingdom wasn't even ours in the first place, and that brings me on to the 3rd and final backstage character you can find, the mannequin. Thanks to advice that the developer gave me on where to look, I ran in and out of the subway until the mannequin finally appeared sitting on a bench. Like the others, it spoke to me directly. You may now be king, but a time will come for you to give up the ring. You'll come to haunt these halls as I do, never taking part in them. just like those before me, and the many after you. I began to wonder if I, a player of DiscoPup, am just another mannequin in this world. It's a puppet that anyone can take control of, whether that's me or you or anybody else who plays this game. We're all getting to the credits in our own ways, whether that's the choices we make along the path, or what order we do things in, and eventually we stop playing. Everything else in DiscoPup aside from us is a permanent fixture, and the VIPs, who I believe also represent the developers, will always have their parts completed already. They've built the stage and provided the actors. They just pass the cameras and controls to each player who boots up the game and allow them to adapt the script that they've written. In the achievement image for finding one of the 3 secret characters, you can see the mannequin that usually sports a black square censoring its head is shown to have a red light in its place. It kinda looks like a camera lens and a big record button, and given that it said that we're not much different and we're clearly a good bit taller than the animal characters, you could assume we may take a similar form in this world. Or at least being of human proportions, as the mannequin seems kinda giant. Even when we experience fixed angle views, these are revealed to be provided by other standalone cameras, which sometimes appear broken or with a cracked lens. As our camera follows Yuri, it's as though we're moving along tracks suspended above the set. Occasionally during gameplay, the screen will show a static effect, like our connection was slightly compromised. And I don't know if I was just imagining it, but it felt like it would mostly happen when I was idle for a while. It seemed to have scan lines too, which brought to mind the CRTs in the tunnel where we first found the mannequin with the ring. They likewise show the various camera angles we see in the respective areas they present, which brings me on to what I think could be the structure of DiscoPup's 3 realities. First, we have the movie that's happening on stage, but it's a place where the majority of the actors might not even know they're acting. To them, this could be the only reality. But then we have the backstage area behind the curtain, also encompassing the VIP room, which is where the gods of the game exist. The VIPs, the developers, the director, the player. From here, we spectate and command the events that unfold on stage. Then we see a third dimension, a place that appears to be our real world, that we can catch a glimpse of when Yuri opens the door in the cinema. Interacting with it, we see that the door that leads to this place is open. And that much is true, because the door is always open for us to close the game and return to our reality. It seems to me that Yuri, and perhaps also other characters, have at some point become aware of this structure, realizing that they are just actors in a film unknowingly following a script. It's like discovering that what you thought was your free will was actually entirely dictated by an invisible entity. And that's the horror of DiscoPup, the idea of realizing you're no more than a puppet trapped in an endless cycle of events for the entertainment of higher beings. If anything, this sounds like being stuck in a kind of hell. There are a number of references to hell in the game, the most obvious being Cerberus, a guard dog named after the Hound of Hades that was basically the bouncer at the gates of the underworld that would stop the dead from leaving. In that same vein, Cerberus watches over the threshold between the 2 main in-game realms. Greek mythology is brought up in other parts too, as we witness a single interaction between Yuri and a goat named Orpheus, which made me realize Yuri could be short for Eurydice. In a nutshell, the story goes that Orpheus travelled to the underworld in an attempt to bring his dead wife Eurydice back to the land of the living. He managed to charm Cerberus and Hades by playing music on his lyre, and Hades allowed Orpheus to take his wife back with him so long as he walked in front of her and did not turn around until they were out of the underworld. Just as they got to the exit, Orpheus had become suspicious that she wasn't following him and that Hades had tricked him. So the idiot turns around and watches Eurydice get dragged back into the underworld forever. Others, like Plato, have described Orpheus's journey into the underworld as cowardly, since he kinda cheated his way into the land of the dead with music, rather than be willing to sacrifice his life. His methods can be seen as disrespectful to the laws of the gods as well as the deities themselves, and perhaps even indicate a lack of true love, as he didn't want to die for her and decides to manipulate others instead. With this interpretation in mind, it's no wonder he assumed Hades had tricked him, because he would comfortably trick others himself. Now, the conversation between Orpheus and Yuri takes on a lot more meaning. It's clear that this is the aftermath of a failed attempt to escape from hell, and Orpheus's cowardice was the cause. He accuses Yuri of not being able to understand that venturing into the wolf's den and making it out unscathed is no easy task, giving her the saxophone to try making it out of here alone. Yet, when finally faced with the exit from this place, she closes the door. Our reality isn't exactly any better than DiscoPup, Corruption, crime, and discrimination all occur in this virtual world, but we have all that and more. There's no better place to escape to, and so Yuri chooses not to run from her situation and actions, but instead decides to stay in this realm that she had once tried so hard to leave. There are multiple endings in DISCOPUP based on the mask you use to get into the club and whether or not you remove your mask once inside. Using the disturbing stitched-up mask that is insinuated to be made from other animals gets you the bad outcomes, and it's worth noting that this unethical method is the easier and quicker way to get past the bouncer. You don't have to use the ring at all though, and the paper dog mask will net you the more positive endings, but will require more steps to get the hat and outfit needed to complete a suitable disguise. In a sense, it's as though you're better off not hurting others and avoiding cheating your way to the goal, even if your surrounding environment almost encourages you to do the worst you can. Engaging in some light deceit in an unjust world is more than understandable, just don't go too far. Speaking of the ring, the description calls it the Ring of Gyges, which is part of a legend about King Gyges of Lydia that Plato's The Republic uses to present a question. It's said that a shepherd who was an ancestor of the king discovered a tomb in the form of a bronze horse that held a corpse that was larger than that of a man wearing a ring, much like the giant mannequin we find in the subway. It was basically a magic ring that allows its wearer to be invisible, and the question asked in the Republic is whether or not a person would act morally even knowing that there'd be no consequences for their actions. This can be applied to DISCOPUP in a couple ways. The first is that the idea of invisibility is appealing as it means you can go anywhere, like trading it and entering a club that only lets dogs in. But it can also refer to our role as an omniscient invisible force controlling what happens. Yuri, and by extension the player, are presented with choices to make. And you can argue both entities are connected to one another, because neither our beloved seal protagonist nor the player are going to want the bad ending. Not removing the mask and simply dancing in the club gives you the more unsatisfying outcomes, like there's no real resolution. And only by removing the mask and facing the consequences do we actually witness the lesson. There's a lot of ways in which you can interpret what I'll just call the best ending of DISCOPUP, where Yuri throws her mask into the air and the others join her as they dance freely and have a grand old time. But I'm gonna throw my kinda wacky reading out there which centers around the importance of masks. Psychologist Carl Jung's concept of a shadow self and the unconscious revolve around the aspects of ourselves that we might consider as undesirable, and this also isn't something we're aware of unless we acknowledge it. It's like wearing a mask or acting out a persona that makes it easier to feel accepted in society, but not consciously doing so. It's even more prevalent in DISCOPUP as a movie, as the characters quite literally have two identities, so to speak. The intro shows the names of them like actors and the characters they portray. For example, Yuri plays Seely and Arista plays Tyr. They're personas that we see donned on stage, and we only witness their maskless selves backstage or in the shadows. At the end of the tracks, there's a blanket of darkness you can interact with that prompts a bizarre and eerie scene depicting a tower, a moon, and a horse in front of a night sky of black stars. This is overtly a reference to the King in Yellow and likely the bronze horse in the Ring of Gyges story, especially since the area this happens in is the same location you find the ring. But I'll get to the analysis of Carcosa a bit later. Jung also describes a horse archetype, which can symbolize instinct and the shadow self. It can be both the potential for freedom, but also destruction. It's a way to reach those hidden parts and gain knowledge and self-awareness that may have previously been inaccessible, and in turn confront them. A dream involving a horse could show what one's relationship with their animal soul is like, and dreams in general are said to be a window into our unconscious. The shadow self can harbour aspects considered both positive and negative, so long as the person feels the need to suppress them. And even though there's nothing bad about being a seal, a pig, or a fox, they still need to hide that part of themselves to conform. Even despite the fact that a baby seal is called a pup and you'd think would qualify for entry to DISCOPUP just based on the name. You could even say that we as the player are the horse. We have the ability to guide Yuri to psychological freedom in the good endings, or condemn her to the bad ones. And just imagine the horror of discovering that a mask you wore or an act you put on to temporarily fit in became welded into place, claiming the stage and damning the real you to the shadows. While Jung was not in fact a direct influence, I had to discuss it not only because it fit the theme so well, but also because personas, dreams, and masks link to a story that is literally quoted within the game. A conversation with a pair of pigs in the subway goes as follows. You, miss, should unmask. Indeed? Indeed, it's time. We have all laid aside disguise but you. I wear no mask. No mask? No mask. This is almost identical to the opening of The Mask in The King in Yellow, a book by Robert W. Chambers that contains a collection of short stories and poems. Within these is a fictional forbidden play also titled The King in Yellow, which is said to drive those who read it to madness. The king is an alien god who is linked to a place called Carcosa, suggested to possibly be within another dimension or dream world, and Cerberus as well as other characters openly refer to the backstage realm of DISCOPUP as Carcosa. In the mythos, it has some notable characteristics, like black stars that still shine in the night sky, and that tower tops rise past the moons that hang low. It's exactly the kind of scene we see when we interact with the void past the tracks. Carcosa also correlates with the features of the dreamlands that Lovecraft often used as a setting, which I've seen described as a dream reflection of Earth that attracts unwitting people into its realm. And there's a theory that Carcosa is one of Earth's oldest dreams that exists somewhere in the void between the stars, something that reminded me of dialogue on the alien spaceship. One of these so-called seals simply states that no star shines over DISCOPUP, and the captain says that there are no stars, no planets, but the universe still goes on, refusing to fly into the void that exists above the club. Things progressively get stranger throughout the game, like our trip to Carcosa brought back some of its madness with it. But the idea of The King in Yellow being a fictional play is what stuck out in my mind, because it's not something that's meant to just be read, it's a script made to be acted out on stage. The focus on the backstage elements and especially the curtain imagery felt a lot more in line with a theatre production instead of film. And when it comes to The King in Yellow, there's very little description of this entity aside from bearing scalloped tatters. And when I thought about that specific shape of cloth, I instantly pictured the bottom edge of the stage curtains. In terms of their function in plays, they can signal beginning and ends of scenes or the story as a whole, as well as changes between locations and characters as the props and actors all shuffle around out of view of the audience. In a way, the curtains have the power of a god, able to warp reality and transport the spectator to different realms. What if this veil is the King in Yellow? Perhaps Cerberus saying that the king is right here could reference those that appear just as he delivers that line. Obviously, movie screens can have curtains too, but in both cases, I usually only ever think of them in the colour red. So maybe there's some meaning to be extracted from DISCOPUPs being green, though I'm not too sure myself. Still, with The King in Yellow being a play within a book and DISCOPUP being a film within a game, I think that connection is quite an important one. There are a number of references to other media that you can spot in the game too, Majora's Mask being an obvious example. But the second I saw the floor of the bus, I knew I was playing a title that was in part inspired by Twin Peaks, and combined with the significance of curtains and alternate dimensions, you've basically got the pieces of the Black Lodge. There's arguably even more in common with DISCOPUP and Inland Empire, where the shooting and story of a film becomes blurred with reality. I don't want to get into spoiler territory for that, but let's just say that David Lynch is mentioned in the special thanks section of the credits for good reason. The writer and designer Guillermo Garcia very kindly took the time to answer questions I had on DISCOPUP and its development, giving me plenty of interesting insight into a game that I had a lot of questions about. It's always neat to see developers inspired by where they live in the world, even down to the details that they encounter in their area. For the developers of DISCOPUP, it was the Spanish city Granada and its nightlife. While we weren't trying to recreate it explicitly, it quite obviously influenced the game's world. Not just in terms of environments, but also the kind of characters you encounter and the situations you might find yourself in. There's one character outside Sir Osis's bar who would run towards you whenever you entered the area to try and advertise the establishment. Each time it would waste about a minute on the timer, so getting caught by them too much could cost you valuable time in your loop. Guillermo stated that our city is famous for having extremely annoying promoters chasing after you to tell you about some pub or club. There's in fact this one specific street in Granada which is brimming with these kinds of PR and it's just daunting. We thought it'd be funny and unique to have a character just like that in the game. For a time loop game, a mechanic like that is frankly genius, and it's interesting to see something like that come from their own lived experience. Guillermo continues, as a writer, the people I've met here throughout my life have always been a great source of inspiration for my stories. How they can be mean and friendly at the same time. How often you find people that are extremely kind, and others that are just looking for a way to trick you, sometimes just for the fun of it. There's this medieval literary genre in our country known as the picaresque novel, which usually follow the adventures of a roguish protagonist who gets by in a corrupt society through the use of their wits and guile. This figure of the Spanish rogue is quite present in our culture, and I find it appealing as I think it's how people would actually behave in such an unfair world. The characters in DISCOPUP often lie, deceive you, they take advantage of your naivety, and at the same time they help you, they give you gifts, they confide in you their deepest regrets, and you can't really blame them because they're just trying to get by as you are. The most shocking thing I learned is that DISCOPUP took a year to make. I assumed from the quality, content, and size of the team it would have taken a lot longer, though I did also find out that it was initially supposed to just be a week-long project for a short comedic game, centered around a seal that wants to sneak into a dogs-only nightclub, and needed a simple, low-poly visual style. The old Animal Crossing games instantly came to mind, and since it was supposed to be for a small project, we went for it. Had we known the game would actually take a whole year for us to be satisfied, we might have gone for an entirely different aesthetic. There was this specific tone and setting we wanted to achieve, which was this hybrid between comedy and horror. Two genres which may seem opposites, but I find them to be actually quite related. A slight difference in pacing and presentation can easily change a jump scare to a punchline, inspiring a laugh instead of a scream. In both the punchline and the jump scare, the goal is to surprise the player, and the means to do so are similar. Furthermore, I feel like in real life, these two entirely different tones are often more present together than apart. Life is often as ridiculous as it is terrifying, and when I write stories, I try to make them feel as relatable as possible. It's nothing new to make a cute game that turns progressively creepy and gory as you progress. But with DISCOPUP, we wanted to make a game that was cute, funny, and horrific at the same time. It never tries too hard to be cute, nor does it hide the dark stuff lying beneath the surface. From the very beginning, you're exposed to an ominous alleyway where you have to rummage through the trash to get a wallet. And immediately after, you're listening to a banger track as you make your way to the nightclub. It's not a horror game, nor is it a wholesome game. Like life, sometimes you smile, sometimes you cower in fear. And while it may seem surreal at first, I feel like it makes for a more complete experience. There's still so much to experience and analyze when it comes to DISCOPUP, and the free demo even provides a different perspective. After the initial bus segment, you have a chance to play as the bouncer Cupcake during the hour or so leading up to the club doors opening. The owner, Max Jr., instructs them to not let any non-dogs into the building or they'll be fired. Cupcake, despite their intimidating build, isn't confident enough to speak back to their boss, or even the nearby cop, having to wear vision-obstructing sunglasses in order to feel tough. The demo does offer an exclusive mechanic that is reminiscent of bullying Animal Crossing villagers you don't like with a shovel, since you can quite literally shove characters that are in your way to brute force through a small crowd who refuse to move. Also, this short experience provides an explanation for how that key got into the field, and introduces the existence of the runaway gate. Throughout this video, I've done my best to piece together the mystery and themes of DISCOPUP in the way that I perceived it, but there's a whole lot more I couldn't quite fit together and didn't have time to dig into. For example, how Arista and his role's name may relate to Aristeas and Tyr from Greek and Norse mythology respectively. Skimming over both, I can immediately spot keywords like dogs and wolves, stars, the concept of sacrifice, and even a direct connection to Eurydice in the case of Aristeas. In another unrelated line of thought, I imagine the premise of DISCOPUP being like that of a masquerade ball, allowing those of varying social statuses to gain a freedom via anonymity, but at the same time repressing their true identity to fit into the invisible prison walls of society's rules. And then my mind darted to the revelation of multiple film posters in the VIP room hallway. Did this mean that once films are completed, another begins? Who will be the next protagonist, and what role would our Yuri take on in this new story? I chose to cover DISCOPUP not only because I think it's criminally underrated, but also because I desperately want to see what other players are able to uncover. So if it interests you, please do buy the game and leave a review to support the developers. Even if you just watch this all the way through, I'd love to hear what kind of interpretations you have. On the topic of the developer, whose name is Parry Mechanics, they do have some rough plans for possible future titles. Guillermo said, "I can say that it will be an entirely different game, because we don't want to get stuck making games in the same genre over and over. Our studio name alludes to the fact that we try to implement a timing-based mechanic as a main feature in all our games. There are many ways and genres in which this can be achieved, and we're looking forward to making it our signature. Thanks to the devs for giving me a key for the game, answering my questions, and providing concept art I could show in the video. I'd like to give a huge thank you to Alexander Alvarez and all my other patrons for supporting the channel. Finally, thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see my future work. I'll see you in the next one.